We're going to start by sewing the center back seam. You want to make sure that the right sides are together. And you're going to use the very narrow zigzag, which looking up top here is a 0.5, a C, and a 2.5. It's also the edge of the presser foot because it hasn't told us any different. And when you get close to the top here, the idea is we want to blend it off into nothing so that we don't just want to come straight off. If you do, you're going to get a point at the top of your head. Some of you might want to use one of these friction pens and just draw in your line that you're going to follow, just to make it a bit easier. So now I'm coming to the top and I'm just going to blend it off, so my last stitch is just going to be on the fold. And then just back stitch. And then repeat on the other hood. Now it says turn one of the hoods right side out. Nice. And leave the other one the way it is. You're going to place one hood inside the other so that the right sides of the fabric are facing each other. And you're going to pin the face edge only, which is this long part right here. Okay, so the long part, not the bottom. Make sure everything lines up. If you want openings for the drawstring, what you're going to do now is you're going to mark 2 dots, 3 centimeters from the bottom and 5 centimeters from the bottom on both sides. And you're not going to sew between those 2 dots. If you don't want a drawstring, you're going to ignore this part and you're just going to stitch the entire way through at a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So on your throat plate, that would be that first line. I'm going to do the openings for the dots so that you know how to do that. So I'm going to mark my first at 3 centimeters and my second at 5 centimeters on this side. And I'm going to do exactly the same on this side. So I'm going to use a 1 centimeter seam allowance, a very narrow zigzag. So now I have my openings, and that's where the string will eventually come in. Now it says you're going to press this seam open. And I find the easiest thing to do is to place it around the end of the ironing board. Take your press cloth and press it open. So the next thing says, if you've left the holes for the drawstring, we now need to edge stitch a box so that the seam allowance isn't going to go over and close up the hole. And we're going to edge stitch from the good side because we can line that up and it looks nicer. So you're going to line up the center of the presser foot and you're going to stitch a box around the opening. So line up the center with this seam and we're going to stitch a straight stitch all the way around. 0, A, 3. And right there is my opening. So I'm going to line up the center of my presser foot right with that opening. By having my needle at a 3, it's going to be right beside it. So I'm going to stitch this way. I'm going to pivot just past where my opening is, and I can put a pin there. Then I'm going to pivot, go around to the bottom, and create that box. And there's my box on the outside, and it's going to prevent this from going in. Now you're going to repeat on the other side. Now we're going to turn the hood right side out, and we're going to press so that the facing seam is nice and crisp. And crisp means that this seam is open, that not one side is folding over on itself. Take your hood, and you're going to push one inside the other. Now we're going to press it so that that seam is nice and crisp. Make sure you are using a press cloth so that we don't ruin the top of your fabric. So now I've got my hood, and we're going to top stitch right along the front, again pinning it to make sure it's nice and open. And we're going to use a 5A3, and this time we're going to use a 2 centimeter seam allowance. So you're going to line up the folded edge right along that 2 centimeter line. Top stitching means you're going to stitch on top of the material, so you're going to see it. This is where you want your thread to match your fabric. I purposely didn't match mine so that you guys are able to see. You're going to want to keep your needle in the down position. It's going to make it much easier for you to sew and remove the pins while still making sure that seam is crisp. So now we have our hood. So there's the facing with the top stitch, top of our hood, and this is going to go around our neck area.